Hyper-Sanity is not a diagnosis. It is not an enlightenment. It is not superiority. It is a framework for understanding what can happen when prolonged suffering, instability, and contradiction force consciousness into recursive awareness. This book began from a simple observation. People often say they value compassion, truth, justice, and reason, but their actions frequently produce something else. They perform compassion without sacrifice. They speak about justice without consistency. They claim rationality while filtering reality through comfort, ideology, identity, or fear. They acknowledge suffering when it is visible, temporary, or socially useful, while ignoring suffering that is slow, complex, invisible, or inconvenient. Hypersanity begins in the gap between what people claim and what their actions materially reinforce. It is the attempt to examine that gap honestly. The chapters that follow are not written from comfort. They emerged from disability, isolation, caregiving, institutional failure, economic instability, invisible suffering, and the long process of trying to understand why modern society can speak so fluently about empathy while abandoning people materially. This book introduces several key ideas. Ignoration is the active avoidance of truth, complexity, or contradiction when those things threaten comfort or identity. Hyposanity is the retreat into simplified reality structures that protect emotional certainty at the cost of deeper awareness. Recursive awareness is the process of examining how psychology, ethics, institutions, technology, suffering, and consciousness shape one another. Empath critical ethics is the integration of compassion and critical analysis, judging morality not by performance but by material consequence. The purpose of this book is not to provide certainty. The purpose is to build coherence, to ask better questions, to examine contradiction without surrendering to despair, to remain compassionate without becoming naive, to pursue truth without pretending any human being possesses it completely. The invisible weight is about the burden carried by people who see suffering others ignore, contradictions others dismiss, and systems others accept as normal. It is also about what remains after illusion weakens: fragility, responsibility, meaning, and the possibility of leaving the world slightly less blind than the way you found it. The invisible human. There are forms of suffering modern society does not recognize unless they become visually undeniable, economically useful, or socially fashionable. A person can deteriorate slowly for years while remaining functionally invisible to the system supposedly designed to help them, not because the suffering is fake, not because the pain is small, but because invisible suffering creates administrative inconvenience. Modern civilization measures human legitimacy through visibility. Can you work, perform, socialize correctly, maintain output? Can you appear emotionally stable enough to not disrupt others? If the answer becomes no, something disturbing begins to happen. You slowly stop existing in the minds of other people. Not completely, just enough. Enough to notice that concern is often conditional. Enough to realize empathy frequently collapses when suffering becomes long term, repetitive, or structurally inconvenient. Enough to understand that many people are comfortable acknowledging pain only when it can be resolved quickly, aestheticized into inspiration, or converted into ideology. Invisible suffering exists in a strange psychological territory. You are simultaneously suffering too much to function normally while appearing functional enough for society to deny the severity of your condition. You become trapped between categories, too sick to live normally, not visibly sick enough to be believed. This creates a form of existential distortion difficult to explain to people who have always existed inside stable systems. When instability becomes permanent, the mind changes, not metaphorically, structurally. Your attention reorganizes itself around survival. You begin noticing patterns constantly: shifts in behavior, contradictions in language, institutional indifference, social performance, the mechanics of manipulation, how quickly morality disappears when helping someone becomes costly. You start seeing the difference between what people claim to value and what their actions materially reinforce. At first, this realization feels isolating. Later, it becomes impossible to unsee. Many people assume heightened awareness emerges from intelligence alone. Often, it emerges from prolonged exposure to instability. A person forced to survive inside uncertainty begins recursively analyzing everything because prediction becomes psychologically necessary. What healthier individuals may experience as philosophical curiosity, others experience as adaptation. You learn systems because systems determine whether you eat. You study psychology because human behavior becomes unpredictable under stress. You analyze ethics because moral inconsistency begins directly affecting survival itself. The mind becomes recursive under pressure, not enlightened, recursive. You revisit interactions repeatedly. You analyze outcomes. You simulate possibilities. You reconstruct social dynamics, trying to understand why suffering becomes invisible the moment it loses social utility. Over time, this creates a fracture between internal and external reality. Externally, the world continues operating normally. Internally, you begin recognizing how much of society depends upon selective perception. People call themselves compassionate while ignoring structural suffering. People perform morality while materially contributing to exploitation. People claim rationality while emotionally filtering reality through ideology, identity, and comfort. You begin realizing that truth is often socially negotiated rather than empirically pursued. And once this becomes visible, normal interaction changes forever because you are no longer participating entirely inside the same reality framework. You are observing the framework itself. This is where the foundations of hypersanity begin, not in superiority, delusion, or transcendence, but in prolonged confrontation with contradiction. The contradiction between ethical language and ethical action, the contradiction between institutional purpose and institutional behavior, the contradiction between human self image and material outcomes. Suffering alone does not produce awareness. Many people suffer and become more psychologically rigid. But prolonged invisible suffering combined with recursive introspection can produce something else, a heightened sensitivity to contradiction itself. The more unstable your environment becomes, the more impossible it becomes to survive through comforting illusions. You either learn to see reality more clearly or you psychologically collapse trying to avoid it. Modern society calls this overthinking. Sometimes it is. Other times, it is what consciousness looks like when survival requires pattern recognition beyond socially comfortable limits. Most people will never understand the state because most people are buffered by stability, social stability, economic stability, familial stability, institutional stability, and physical stability. While those disappear simultaneously, consciousness changes. The person emerging from that pressure often becomes unrecognizable both to others and to themselves, not because they became irrational, but because they were forced to confront aspects of reality most people spend their entire lives successfully avoiding.